Hi, my name is Audrey Castells, and in my presentation, we will be discussing court packing and how checks and balances influence it. To start off, checks and balances are the foundation of the United States federal government. Checks and balances are essential for any state to prevent the use of political gain or corruption. As you can see in the picture, the legislative and the judicial branch are much smaller than the executive. This is why checks and balances are in place. The legislative and judicial needs to be just as important as the executive to avoid having a monarchy like there was in Britain. However, in today's society, the executive branch tends to be idolized more than the other branches. Currently, in 2021, there are 435 members in the House of Representatives, 221 Democrats, and 211 Republicans. And in the Senate, there are 100 members, 50 Democrats, and 50 Republicans. To continue with checks and balances, currently in 2021, the executive branch is Democratic with Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president. If the Senate were to tie, with it being 50-50, Kamala Harris would be the final vote. This could be considered worrisome to individuals with how divided political parties have been within the past several years. And over to the picture, you can see on the left is our 46th president, Joe Biden, and the first female vice president, Kamala Harris. The Supreme Court currently has 9 members, which involves 6 judges who are appointed by a Republican presidents, and 3 judges appointed by Democratic presidents. The most recent president appointing a judge was Donald Trump on the Republican side, and our last Democratic president appointing a judge was Barack Obama. Now to address court packing. Since taking office, Joe Biden has brought up the topic of adding more Supreme Court justices because the Supreme Court is allegedly out of whack. The number of Supreme Court justices has not changed since 1869, which was over 150 years ago. The last significant attempt to pack the court was done by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And over to the picture, you can see that is a picture of the Supreme Court. Now diving into the history of court packing. The Judiciary Act of 1789 established federal and district courts as well as a 6-member Supreme Court. In 1801, Congress reduced the size of the Supreme Court to 5 members after vacancy. This was repealed shortly after, so the court stayed at 6 members. During the Civil War, the court had 10 Supreme Court justices, and over to the right is a picture of the Judiciary Act, and I will continue on why the court expanded to 10 members on the next slide. So continuing with the court packing history, during the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln was able to enlarge the Supreme Court, with the court's permission, of course. This was to appoint more justices who favored Republicans to abolish slavery and support the Union. This could be seen as a possible issue in today's society for increasing the Supreme Court for political gain, even if it is for the greater good. In 1866, the court was then reduced to 7 justices, and this was thought to be in order to raise the salaries of judges and for political conflict between the court and Andrew Jackson. Also, 10 justices were seen as a large amount, and they wanted to just reduce it. Over to the right, the picture shows the American flag with the Confederate to symbolize the Union against the Confederate, showing the Civil War. Continuing with the history of court packing, in 1869, the Supreme Court obtained 9 justices, which was the last time it was changed. During the Reconstruction era, Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to implement his New Deal. However, the court shut down his ideas. Due to this, Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to increase the number of Supreme Court justices for policies to be in his favor, more specifically, implement the New Deal. And over to the right, there is a picture of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Again, continuing with the history of court packing. However, because Franklin Delano Roosevelt wanted to put term limits on justices as well as the justices completely denying his New Deal ideas, he was unable to increase the number of justices. His ideas for creating term limits were nominating a new judge for each judge with 10 years of experience who did not retire within 6 months of turning 70 years of age. This would also make it so that presidents would be able to appoint judges to lower courts. Again, since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, court packing has not been seriously contemplated. And in the picture, there's an ad of Franklin Delano Roosevelt trying to sell his idea of the New Deal, which was supposed to offer help to those suffering in the Great Depression. Why is court packing being considered today? Since the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the appointment of Amy Coney Barrett in 2020 by former President Donald Trump, there have been advocates to increase the number of justices. These advocates argue that the composition of the Supreme Court heavily leans on the Republican side. So, in other words, many people believe that the court is packed with Republicans. Adding 2 or 4 justices appointed by a Democratic president, in our case currently, Joe Biden, the president could bring about a balanced bench. Other ideas include reducing the courts down to 8 members to achieve a balanced bench. Another proposition is having 5 justices appointed by Republicans, 5 justices appointed by Democrats, and 5 justices nominated by lower courts. This would prohibit perceived Republican judges from turning down many Democratic laws that conflict with Republican views. With a balanced Supreme Court, it is more assured to have laws passed based on practicality rather than being based on political bias. Now, here's some hesitations to court packing. Some hesitations to court packing are with the advocates who are against court packing. They're worried that if more Supreme Court justices are added for the sake of making them look a certain political way, it will delegitimize the Supreme Court. Senator Marco Rubio is currently trying to pass an amendment that will limit the Supreme Court justices to 9 members. This is definitely hit or miss with both parties. With the extremist ideologies that many Republicans fear Democrats will pass, there's hesitation to increase the court size. Currently, there are more Democrats in the House of Representatives, and again, if there were to be a tie in the Senate, the vice president would be the tiebreaker. Kamala Harris, being a Democrat, would most likely be in favor for the Democrats. For many Republicans, the Supreme Court seems to be a barrier from the extreme Democratic laws potentially going to be passed. Advocates against court packing have a perceived Republican Supreme Court that in itself brings about a balance to the checks and balance system due to a primarily Democratic legislative branch and a Democratic executive branch. In other words, since the Trump trial, where all of the Democrats were for charging Trump and only a few Republicans were for him, there's a lot of hesitation to add more Democrats when the Democrat population is so heavily influenced in the House, and having a Democratic president definitely makes it so people are worried that Republican views will not get out. So now we'll circle back to checks and balances and implementing the Constitution into it. The Constitution states that the Supreme Court is to extend to all cases and to use the Constitution to interpret trials. So, if you go to the Supreme Court, they will use the Constitution to determine what that person did or the situation, if it is constitutional or unconstitutional. If the court were today to change to primarily Democratic judges in 2021, the checks and balance system could be jeopardized. If each branch identified as primarily Democratic, there would be less struggle to pass Democratic ideologies that could be strongly against Republican beliefs. For example, abortion. A lot of Republicans are against it, some are for it, but it could be Democrats could be against it, but for the most part, Democrats are for abortion. And the picture is the Constitution. Possible solutions. There is no easy solution to solve the issues within the Supreme Court. And if someone hears an easy solution, it is probably not correct. A generally accepted proposal from both Democrats and Republicans is to have term limits. Because many judges are in the courts for 20 plus years and serving in their 70s and 80s, kind of like Ruth, who passed away having cancer and being in her 80s, it kind of makes individuals wonder if she is capable, or if she was capable, of running when she was going through her illnesses. This could be potentially dangerous in an unbalanced court packing situation, as well as the mental sharpness of a judge and their ability to accurately interpret cases. A belief that is less accepted on both sides, but could be a potential solution, is to limit the number of justices in the Constitution. This could help prevent court packing to pass laws that have been turned away in the past from either side, Democratic or Republican, or that have been turned away in the past, as well as providing some stability for the country. So if 9 justices are put in the Constitution, there will not be any risk of adding justices just to pass a certain law. In general, since the election of Donald Trump in 2016, there has been severe disagreement between Republicans and Democrats. In order for anything to get fixed, there has to be healing for both parties. For any policies to be for the better of the United States, its checks and balance system, and most importantly, the American people. And for my Works Cited page. The first one is a news article about Marco Rubio, and that explains his views and hesitations to wanting to pack the court, as well as why there should be an amendment to put a limit on 9 justices, other than the argument that it's been like that for 150 years. This one is the textbook, because I did use the Constitution from the textbook as well as a few definitions. The third site is a site from the database JSTOR. This one helps explain checks and balances and the importance that it has in our society. The fourth site was explaining how many representatives were in the House and the importance of it. The fifth site is a congressional research service that describes the history of court packing, the hesitations, and as well as reasons to pack the court. And my final source, not my final source, this source is about the New Deal with FDR. That was just kind of explaining like why he wanted to do the New Deal to help in the Great Depression. And this last one was breaking down the House of Representatives into how many Democrats and how many Republicans, just because I wanted to be sure, other than this first one, and this one being a database, and obviously the textbook. 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are from government websites. Just I wanted to make sure I got the most accurate information. The top one is a news article. And yes, that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for watching.